Hi and welcome to another of the Ash PE screencasts. And in this session we're going to be looking at stress and how to manage it to potentially optimise performance. So we see a lot in players and coaches how people can get stressed out, especially when there's a lot of high pressure situations. But what we need to be able to do is establish what stress is, what it looks like, how it manifests, and how we can potentially manage it. So stress in sport is often linked to negative feelings and can be seen as a psychological state produced by perceived physiological or psychological forces acting upon our senses or our well-being. So there in itself is the first key point, that it's often linked to negative feelings, and sometimes it's linked to the term anxiety, and that's the perception that our ability may not match the demands of the particular task. And we can see there Arsene Wenger obviously struggling with the task at hand and therefore invoking some kind of stress. So what we need to be able to also recognise is that stress can be a good thing. If you think about it, in sport, and especially extreme sports, some people put themselves into stressful situations. For example, this guy here doing a bungee jump, that's obviously going to invoke what we would perceive as stress. But some players actually perform better, and it's argued that Andy Murray, when he gets sort of stressed or worked up, that actually makes him play better. And this term is known as eustress. So the key thing there is to now recognise the fact that we can have what's known as good stress and also negative stress. So the next thing we need to do is, how does this manifest? What does it look like? So the short term as stress releases and the responses to stress are usually, what happens is it causes a release of hormones in your body, and when your body detects a small stress, a small region in the brain called the hypothalamus reacts by stimulating the body to produce hormones that include adrenaline. So if we've got adrenaline, therefore we've got an increase in heart rate, raising blood pressure, increase in the O2 rich blood, and that's going to help with that fight or flight aspect that you may have heard of before. And in short term, it's a good thing that we have that increase in the heart rate and that blood flushing around our body so that we can act. But if we have stress over a long period of time, then it can become a negative thing. There's a very famous example of Marcus Trescothick. He's only aged 32, but quit the 2006-2007 Ashes team over in Australia because he was suffering from stress. And it was a build-up, and eventually he was diagnosed with stress-related anxiety. So it can be quite a powerful thing and very negative. So the concepts of stress, let's look at what it is. First and foremost, we've got the stressor, and this is the environment that you're actually in. So for example, if you're taking a basketball free throw, or if you're going swimming, how does that potentially change the stress that you would feel? And then you have the stress responses, and these are the physiological changes that occur as a result of the stress that you're under. And these can be cognitive or they can be physiological. But we look at the physiological ones first and foremost. Alright, so look, let's have this situation here. Let's say that you've just got to step up and take this penalty. What feelings does that invoke? How does the environment potentially change the amount of stress that you might feel? Now, if you're a decent footballer, no problem at all. Alright, so let's change that up then. Let's now put you on the end of the 10-metre diving board and you're facing that way. How does that potentially change the amount of stress that you think you might feel in that situation? So the stressor or the stressors will then impact on your stress responses. Now, one of the main components, the main variables that's going to impact on the amount of stress response that you have is your stress experience. So the way that you perceive that situation. So if you're a professional footballer, the one on the left is no problem. If you're Tom Daley, the one on the right is no problem. But depending on who you are, will depend on the amount of perceived stress there would be in that situation. Okay, so sport is quite unique as well in the sense that it has quite obvious triggers that would potentially invoke stress almost on a consistent basis. The first one is the fact that sport is by nature and definition competitive. So that in itself can be a powerful stressor. It puts performers into an evaluation position every single time they play. There's also conflict, potentially with other players or the opposition, that could be a stressor. A sports performer can bring potentially their social stresses from everyday life, causing conflict with individuals about their choices or decisions that they make. And again, that can be the stressor. So there's frustration as well, and we talked about this in one of the previous chapters about frustration, how that can potentially lead to aggression. However, it doesn't always have to, but it's the principle of somebody blocking your goal. What's your target? So it might be to get around a player, they keep tackling you, that in itself can be frustrating and then invoke some stress. It also could be the climate, and this is quite an interesting one, especially with Tokyo coming up. If you've got to work under really hot conditions, really cold conditions, that in itself could be enough to invoke stress in you. You know what it's like when you have to train in December and it's chucking down with rain, freezing cold, compared to when it's June and sunny. It feels very, very different. But think about Tokyo 2020. I think the average temperature there is going to be at 35 degrees. So psychologists right now need to be grabbing hold of our GB athletes and putting them under those situations so that they don't feel stressed when they come to the real thing. So then there's also our trait or our state anxiety. If we suffer from just a normal level of high trait or indeed state anxiety, then that's potentially going to invoke more stress when we're playing sports, because there is that perception that we're not able to handle the situation. Now, someone like Cristiano Ronaldo has a very sort of low trait and low state anxiety, so therefore it's not going to be a problem for him. But how do the rest of us manage that? And that's what we look at now. So we're breaking into two sections. So you've got the cognitive, which is obviously in the mind, and then we've also got the somatic, which is the body's management techniques. One of the first one that we'll look at is positive self-talk. So this is relatively straightforward, where we're saying to ourselves as a performer that we can do it, potentially psyching yourself up before a game. That could be something that you could do. But positive thinking is a cognitive process when sports performers think about attaining success as opposed to losing. So I'm going to score the basket as opposed to I'm worried about missing the basket. And that way we're always invoking a positive thought when we're thinking about our performance. Now, another one that we can do is negative thought stopping. So if we do get those doubts creeping into our minds, we have an alert or an alarm, a metaphorical one, that says, I need to stop thinking about this. So then you change what you're thinking about to something potentially positive, or you just change the negative thought to something different. Now, an interesting one that I've looked at recently is this rational thinking. Now, there's an irrational belief that England can't beat New Zealand, for example, in large test matches in rugby league. But that's not rational if you think it through. And what we can do then is potentially work our way back and say, right, have the England team prepared well? Are the players good enough? Have we trained well? Have we conditioned well? And if we've done all those things, then rationally speaking, we would be able to beat the New Zealand team. But what we're doing is then reducing the amount of stress that we have in that performance, because it's the rational process that we've gone through. All right, another one is this one here, which is mental rehearsal. So this is where you imagine yourself doing the pole vault, you're running down that pathway, you're about to plant the pole into the bed, and then up you go and perform the skill, no problem at all. But you're picturing yourself doing that in your own mind's eye, and that's known as internal imagery. And there's also external imagery, where we picture it as if we're almost in a movie, so you can watch yourself running down and then planting the pole. And out of the two, the internal imagery, which is one on the left, is considered to be the more effective than the external. Most people prefer to use one method or the other, but it's up to you. There's also goal setting as well, and this can be very, very important in reducing the amount of stress. So are you focused on the outcome, or is your coach focusing on the outcome, be it the cup, or are you focusing on your performance? And that's potentially how many passes you've completed in that particular game. Or are you focused on what's known as the process? And this is the technique that you're using during your performance. and depending on what you focus on can reduce the amount of stress that you're under. So if you're just thinking, well, as long as I get my technique right, then I've achieved my goal, therefore that will then impact on my performance. So what we're really talking about here is long and short-term goals that are shared with the person, and there's a lot of research that says that if we have short-term goals, they can impact on reducing the amount of stress because we're getting success. All right, so let's look at the somatic side of it. The first one is relaxation. And this is quite straightforward, but it's not just about having a cup of tea and lying down. It's very much about thinking about each one of your muscle groups and then mentally going through that process of allowing them to relax. And there's also a progressive muscular relaxation technique, which is almost exactly the same, but it's just in a little bit more detail. Becomes more effective with practice. That's the important thing with that. The next one is biofeedback, and this is where we're taking the candidates' heart rates, blood pressures, skin temperature, and then we're raising their awareness about each one of those different aspects. And then the biofeedback information or data is used to then be given to the client, and what they'll do then is they'll use that data to be able to try and control their heart rate, control their blood pressure in those potentially stressful situations. And in some sports, biofeedback can involve simulation machines that are going to allow them to get used to that situation, but they're reducing the heart rate. All of those things are potentially going to impact on a better performance, aren't they? And there's another one that's called centering, and this is where literally you pay attention to the center of your body. So again, it's using your imagination to a certain extent, but you focus on a particular point inside your body, and therefore all the rest of your components are allowing you to relax. All right, and then the last one is quite an old one, but still very well used, and that's just breathing. Being able to control your breathing and relax your breathing, and that in itself can allow the rest of your body to relax as well. Okay, so in summary, what you need to be able to do is describe, explain, and apply your knowledge. So can you describe what each one of the stresses are and the positive and negative stresses? Make sure that you know what the responses are, so the physiological and the mental. And then could you describe the management techniques for the cognitive and also the somatic aspects? Do pause the screencast, go back over those and then have a look. But then the important part is this, the application. So if we have this question here, so performers often suffer stress. It says explain the causes of stress during sport. So well, the causes are potentially the stressor. Okay, that's going to be one, isn't it? And then we need to be recognizing the stress experience, or that's going to have an impact on it. But the conflict, competition, and climate, those were the main sort of components that I would go at if that was the question. So you're covering both of those bases there, really, aren't you? Now here, the command word is explain, and he's looking for 3 different cognitive management techniques during a performance. So you can then explain what positive self-talk is, for example, but then link it to a performance. And if you're doing that for each one of these, so rational thinking, explain what it is, and then say, for example, you're always going to score better than you would if you don't put those sporting examples in. All right, so that's the end of the screencast. Do pause the screencast, go back over it, have a look at each one of the different sections and make sure that you can describe, explain, and then apply. There's also the ASHPE YouTube channel and the ASHPE Weebly, where there's some more resources on other areas as well as this one. Okay, thanks very much.